Welcome to This Old App, a podcast about learning, coding, smashing stuff together, breaking things apart, startups, failing, winning, and any other buzzwords we can think of.
So we've talked about we're working with Vue and Firebase for the Chasms build. And so now I'm dealing with what I usually find to be the hate I have for document data stores compared to relational databases around modeling. So this is the subject we're dealing with is a many-to-many relationship, and it involves permissions. And I'm going to try to explain this as best I can without having graphical uses to do it. But
sure,
we've got this app is unique. We've got the way I'm setting up the model, and this is debatable too, but we have contacts and we have operators. And in the scope of how the app works, a contact is a person that sends an inbound text message to our servers. And then an operator is a person that is in the chat channel who would, there'd be like, let's say 3 operators on a channel that can monitor what comes in from the contacts. And there's a distinct difference between these users because we're not really letting contacts log into the app and use the chat system. The idea is there's a separation between these people, these entities. And so the contacts are simply inbound text messaging, and then the operators are talking to each other in the chat channels and also sending outbound text back to contacts. So we've got these 2 sets of users. And so I don't know, I guess first off, what is your thoughts on that?
So one of the things for the contacts is you may have nothing more than just a text number.
Yes.
That's inbound because it could come out of the blue without us actually setting up a contact, so to speak.
Yep. That's their ID.
Gotta be created on the fly.
And that's their ID, essentially. A contact
That's their ID. That's their ID, and it's potentially the only piece of information we'll have.
Yep.
For it. So that's fine. And as far as I was initially thinking, do we need to have 2 different models for it, or can we go one model and then a field within that to say which they are? But I think 2 different models works better.
Well, the issue there is, as I was thinking about, is like, let's say you were to tell me, Randy, set up 3 operators for construction specialties. If we made them all the same user and their IDs or phone numbers, I got to find out everyone's SMS number just to sign them up for the app.
Yeah, and that's fair. And that's not necessary.
Yeah, email address is typically what you use to sign up for apps. And
these are 2 very distinct user bases, so I'm okay with them having 2 distinct models.
Now, I think
that works.
I do think we can end up having a contact and a operator who are the same person with separate like entities in the model, and that's fine with me. I don't really, if you went out in the field, so to speak, and decided to text in, you didn't have the chat app with you for whatever reason. I don't have sure, you can do that, but we don't see that as a common kind of occurrence. So now we've got
and we don't have to link the 2 either. So I can have a record in both. They don't have to be linked.
Yep. So the next step is, okay, we're going to have different chat channels. Like right now with construction specialties, we haven't looked at we haven't gone beyond the idea of one channel for all of the inbound contacts. But we've already talked about before that it's likely where there could be an organization that wanted to have multiple channels multiple inbound phone numbers for specific groups of contacts. So you might have like, hey, these are all of the people that work in one part of the country. These are people that all work with one particular client. Like, hey, these are all, let's say, CVS related. We want to have anyone that calls in anyone that sends a message in will be related to this one particular client who's massive or something. So we've got that. We've got an issue of multiple channels, multiple what I'm calling teams. And then we also have the idea, even though I do not want to reproduce Slack in the least, we do have the idea that the operators may not all be in the same office and may need their own channel where they are talking to each other about unrelated contact stuff. So we've got now a concept of teams, groups of operators. We've got channels, which kind of map to each team, but also the idea that there may be a separate channel that may not be related to a team. It may just be related to all the operators on the app. So I've got I got a model of teams. I've got a model of channels. And then I need to be able to assign different operators to different channels and to different teams. And that's where we get into this idea of many-to-many relationships. So first, let me ask your opinion on the teams and channels approach from a model standpoint.
Teams make sense as far as teams of operators. Mm-hmm. It doesn't always apply for contacts.
Yeah.
Contacts it's going to be sent to a channel based on what
number the inbound number
SMS number is used. That's what's going to be directed to a channel. I could envision a scenario where they would send all their stuff to one number, precede it with something, and then that splits out the channel. But I don't want to get there now.
Yeah. So right now in the construction specialties model, I don't foresee. I mean, you all probably still use Slack or Microsoft Teams anyway, which is fine. But I'm trying to keep it flexible so that all of a sudden, if a future client or customer were to come in and say, "Hey, we want a channel that doesn't have inbound messaging. We just want a chat channel for our team to be able to talk to each other." Then I would be like, "Oh, well, I tie all channels to teams. Now I got to set up a new team." And now I just feel like if I have these separate models, it leaves us flexible down the road, even though we may start out where it's one channel to one team. So that's kind of...
I think that's fine. I think that works.
Okay. So now here's the crux of the discussion. I need to be able to assign team or operators to specific teams. And so we may have multiple teams. Like a team can have many operators, and an operator can be members of many teams. And so in the relational database world, I have a table called operators and a table called teams. And then I have a many-to-many join table called team operators. And all it may have, typically when I set up a relational database, I'd have an attribute called team ID, attribute called operator ID, and then a role. And even if that role may be the same for everyone, because we're not giving special powers to any particular role, it may just be member. That's how I started out, because sure enough, someone's going to come in and go, "I need an owner that can do changes to that channel." And I'm like, okay, now I've got an admin role on the team and a staff member that can't do anything but read and that kind of stuff. But I leave it flexible. I start out with member, and then over time I can always change it. So I've got these permissions. In the document-based, well, I guess the next question is, does that make sense to you, what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's just the same thing here. You just have a join table, essentially.
But we don't have, so in the document world, that's not how they typically do things.
Right.
In the document world, they do this redundant data thing where they would put a nested object or map on the operator and a nested like object or map on the team, and then you would basically track on both the operator level and the team their association with each other.
No, you're right.
And I don't like that. I don't like it at all. And so I've looked at I've looked at Mongo, and Mongo kind of goes down that route. They recommend that. In Firestore doesn't really have a standard. But I've kind of thought about going down the path of the join table. And I've got a reason why. So the idea of the join table would be I have a table called permissions, I have a collection on Firestore called permissions. And it would have three keys under it. One, organization permissions. Two, and the organization is kind of the owner of the app, of this instance of the app, so to speak. The next key would be teams, and the third key would be channels. And then under that, we would have instances that would have an ID, a joined ID of the team ID and the user ID or the operator ID. And then it would have attached to it the role. And so so this is important for a reason, and it's hard to picture what I'm talking about, but it would essentially, if you were to look at this map of this object that I would have in there, you would say, okay, let's drive down to the permissions collection. Inside is another collection called teams, a sub map called teams. And then each instance would be like a unique ID underscore unique ID. Because that's how maps work in Firestore. Like there's a unique key for each instance. It's not like an array, which is what I was used to in the past. It's of JSON. This is just a multiple objects and nested under objects. So here's the other issue. So you are the user that logs into the app, and I track you. Essentially, you're an operator. But I have to maintain who the current user is. And you've got a unique ID that will be in sync with an operator account on the app. So I need to be able to use your ID as the current user ID and also associate it with the permissions that goes into, I have to be able to associate the current user ID with the ID of an operator in the organization. And if I create the central store and use the user ID as part of the permission ID, I can then do regex on filters to make sure, does this person have permission on this team? Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that makes the most sense to me. I mean, I'm even newer to this whole document model creation than you are. I think that makes the most sense from what I can gather.
Yeah. This is one of those things where I'm like, I don't even know how to search for best practices around it because nobody seems to talk about it that much, which is weird to me. Like,
yeah,
many-to-many relation.
I did a quick Google on join tables and NoSQL, and all I can find is sometimes even on SQL databases, tables are denormalized, and you end up with what we're talking about. So
Yeah. So that's kind of my approach is to like, it feels like I'm going against the grain of forcing a relational approach to a document data store. But I can't foresee a reason why this isn't the better way to go, rather than try to maintain redundant entries, which is very important in Firestore because of the read and writes going on. Because typically, if I were to, when you listen to the Firestore advice, they're like, hey, if you don't, like, if you have nested users under an organization and you also have user accounts, if you try to just reference by ID, then you're going to have millions of reads kind of thing going on, because you have to keep, every time you load the organization, then you have to load the users and all that mess. So, like, they talk about this redundancy, and I'm just like, I thought that's the whole point of normalizing a freaking relational database, is to get rid of redundant data.
right.
And now we're going into this paradigm that's like, oh, this is better, but we're going to make everything redundant. And I'm like, that, like, I don't believe in pure normalization of relational databases in all cases, but I definitely don't understand the benefits of storing the same data on two different tables or two different documents.
Yeah,
So anyway,
and we've talked about this before. We've talked about relational versus document, and we end up in the same place for the most part.
yeah,
I think at the end of the day, if we choose relational, which we have, if we choose document, which we have, we're going to have those things where we want to solve them relationally, and we just have to do our best. And then if at some point we find there's a better way to do it, we rewrite it.
yeah. So anyway, that, I think it was, what was most important was that I kind of talked to you about the overall models I was approaching
Yeah,
this with, because I wanted you to at least say, whoa, that doesn't make any sense. But I think we're on the same page.
I think
And
so, and I think it's the blind leading the blind right now.
well, but here's the thing. We've both built systems. We've both dealt with all sorts of bad backends and bad data stores, and we've built bad ones ourselves.
Yeah,
At least I did.
for sure.
um, and so I think having that experience, the context of various persistence models in our background is almost more important to me than you understand Firestore.
Yeah, yeah,
And so if I was saying something that you're like, yeah, I've dealt with that before, and it was, or it sounds just cockamamie, it feels really odd to be doing it this way. And I guess I guess you could say, why don't you just go with a back end of Rails? And there's definitely an argument. I've thought about that. Like, why don't I? Well, or I should say, why don't I just use a database like Postgres? And I've thought about that, but on the inbound chat level, if this app is going to scale, I don't think a database would be like a relational database is what you need for the scaling of the messaging. The models itself, like the users, the operators, the contacts, the permissions, like I don't foresee, at least at the beginning, that this is going to be used by a company with millions of people.
right.
And so I could see all of that being easily stored with great speed in a Postgres relational database. But it also seems odd to build a mobile, like an app at mobile speed on Firestore, where I didn't keep everything together and immediately broke it off into a different database. Because now at the beginning of the product, I've got to maintain two different data stores, two different platforms. I'm not going to really do Postgres on Google Cloud that I know of. it doesn't seem like that's the best approach. Like, it seems like the better approach is to keep everything on Firestore with its speed and the ability. I have like the two-way syncing I'm able to do with this library, which, by the way, I'm actually doing a Discord meeting with the maintainer of the Vuex Easy Firestore library.
Oh yeah.
Because he's trying to troubleshoot some things, and he's like, "Do you mind talking to me?" And I'm like, "I don't know anything that you're. I don't know the innards of anything you're doing, but if it helps, I will do my best to talk to you." So we'll see where that goes. But
Sure.
yeah, like this is one of those things where I'm keep fighting the desire to go back to what I've used before, because it's just so easy that way. And I keep telling myself
so
it's
easy,
better.
and at the end of the day, you've only been doing it for a decade or two, so it's so easy to just slip back into it, especially
Yeah.
without, and this is in air quotes, formal training on document stores, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to piece something together, use it, but you have nothing to draw on. You have no experience to draw on, really. No significant experience, no significant. It's all anything your mind goes to is relational. So it certainly is hard to work through it that way.
What is weird is that maybe it's just due to the longevity and stability of relational databases, but when I read documentation or best practices around relational, I feel like I get very decisive statements about how you should best model things. And when I read any documentation on document stores, it feels like, well, maybe you can do it like this. And I'm just like, that doesn't help. Like, can someone speak to the like best practices around long-term scalability of how you structure your data at the beginning?
Yeah.
And I know the document data stores are supposed to be flexible. That's part of their calling card. But it feels like the industry that loves this data store type so much don't really have a lot of concrete recommendations for how to use it compared to other ones.
Right.
So I don't know. It's just a frustration.
Yeah.
I've read plenty. Yeah.
I don't have an easy answer, because I've been down this road too, where I was trying to build document stores, and I'm like, I can't wrap my head around it in their way of thinking. I keep trying to put it relational.
Now the flip side of Firestore, of course, is there is this layer of WebSocket level speed on the changes, the snapshot tracking. So if I go in right now and forcefully change like I have the app set up with the locales. So if you want to see the app in Spanish, I have all these translations just instantly change.
Right.
If I go into Firestore on the user account and change the locale, you can see it in your hand, on the phone, and on the browser. You can just see the change immediately, like within 500 milliseconds. Like, it's so fast, and I love that. Like, I'm like, oh man, like I never had that kind of syncing to a sync going on with any data store I've ever used. And that's what Firestore is giving you. It's really quite impressive.
Sure.
And so that's like this huge benefit. And when I taught the boot camp, we showed the students Firebase. It was the real-time database at the beginning. And man, they were like, "Why would you use this MySQL thing?" Like when I started teaching relational, I'm like, "Oh man, it's so weird to have introduced them to one of the newest tools on the market with all this fanciness, and they have no idea that the hardest thing in building apps is naming and modeling,
right,
with other people, especially with other people and their opinions." And I'm like, "Oh no, I think maybe we taught this out of order." But but the students that use Firebase honestly had really impressive apps with the ability to sync the data. Like
Yeah.
they were really, and so it's like one of those like old man things of like, I don't need a snow blower. I'll go out and break my back with a shovel, and then while the kids are just like, broom, I'm done in 10 minutes and I didn't break a sweat. And like, that's kind of it's still that I feel like I'm in that world now. And like you said, I don't know, 20 years, 15 years.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh man, I'm already this old man in the industry in that sense. But anyway, now I'm rambling, but that's essentially, there's not any other big features or models I can think of, but at least we talked about it, or at least I talked the majority of time about it, and you just said you're not crazy. That's enough.
Well, I think the only other things I can think of are messages, right? And messages fit perfectly in a document model. That's fine. That's easy.
Yeah.
Attachments potentially, but again, I think that fits right in there. It can even be part of the messages model potentially. But no, there's nothing. I'm not going to say you're not crazy, because you are crazy, because we're doing it with relational. And I mean, with documents instead of relational, I can't even get it out right. It's like writing with your left hand when you've been writing with your right hand your whole life. So,
yeah.
But no, I think it all makes sense within the context of what we know.
Okay. So yeah, and so now I got to get the permissions set up. What I didn't tell you is I already set up permissions to work as nested under teams, and then realized it's really going to be hard to find out what teams to list a person having access to if each team is storing the permissions themselves. Because what I'm trying to do is build on the menu side, like, hey, if you log in as a current user, here are the channels you have access to. Here are the teams you have access to.
Yeah.
And I can't do that if the teams hold all the data. It's like I have to have a list that I can just run off of. And that can only be generated really by an internal table, or I do that redundant crap where I have user logs in instantly. I know because here's a current user, here's what they have access to. But then I've got to have this like two-way binding on my own internal tables. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense either.
Right.
So anyway, I will continue down this rabbit hole of permissions and stuff. We'll see how it turns out. Maybe we'll actually, maybe by the time we publish this episode, I'll have come to a solution that we can say, do one of those weird like time shifting noises and then say, okay, here we are. This is what I did.
I think so.
All right. That's enough for me.
All right, cool.
Thanks for listening to This Old App. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at www.thisoldapp.online. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. For questions, comments, or things you would like to hear on future shows, please email us at hello@thisoldapp.online. Show music is Guns Blazing by Fab Claxton, licensed by Pond 5. Voiceover work by MeganVoices.com. You'll hear from us soon.